Mountains guard secrets no empire could erase. Swiss DNA hides a ghost from 7,000 years ago. No name, no origin. Where are you watching from? And has a DNA test ever shocked you? Switzerland, clean borders, 4 languages, famous for watches, chocolate, and a neutrality so old it has its own mythology. But here's what nobody tells you. The DNA of the Swiss people doesn't fit the map. It doesn't follow the rules that work for France. It doesn't match Germany next door. It breaks patterns seen across nearly every other European population. And when scientists tried to explain it, they found something buried underneath 7,000 years of history that nobody was supposed to find. A genetic signal with no name, no known origin, and no living population that owns it. This isn't a story about a country. This is a story about what happens when the mountains keep secrets longer than any civilization can survive. And we're going to go through it layer by layer, from the Ice Age all the way to a 2020 scientific paper that rewrote what we thought we knew about who the Swiss actually are. Before we go any deeper, pause for a second. Drop a comment right now. Where in the world are you watching this from? And have you ever done a DNA ancestry test? What did it show you that surprised you? Tell me below, because by the end of this video, you're going to want to get one. If you're fascinated by lost histories and ancient DNA mysteries, subscribe right now. We uncover the stories that textbooks buried. Okay. To understand why Switzerland breaks the genetic map, we need to go back to a time before Switzerland existed, before Europe existed as we know it, before farming, before writing, before anything you were ever taught in school. We need to go back to the first people who ever walked through these mountains. And what happened to them is darker than anything on the surface of Swiss history. Picture Europe 10,000 years ago. No farms, no villages, no borders, just vast forests, frozen rivers, and scattered groups of hunter-gatherers who had been surviving on this continent for over 30,000 years. In the region we now call Switzerland, these people are known to scientists as Western hunter-gatherers, WHGs for short. They were not primitive, they were adapted. They knew every river, every season, and every animal migration in the Alpine region. They buried their dead with red ochre paint on the bones, a ritual that required planning, belief, and ceremony. They wore necklaces made from animal teeth. They understood this land the way only people who had lived on it for thousands of generations could. And then, around 5,500 BCE, something arrived from the east, and within just a few centuries, the WHGs were gone. Not gone as in they left. Gone as in their DNA signal collapses in the archaeological record, fast, hard, and almost total. A 2025 study published in Science Advances looked at what happened when Neolithic farmers arrived in prehistoric Europe. What they found was not a peaceful handover. The evidence pointed to massacre sites, mass graves, and widespread abandonment of settlements. Entire communities erased. Their tools disappeared. Their burial traditions disappeared. Their genetic signature dropped so fast in Swiss ancient DNA samples that researchers are still debating whether it was disease, violence, or displacement. But here's the part that stops you cold. In the canton of Bern, archaeologists found a single grave. Inside it, a farmer's grain and a hunter's spear, one body, two worlds. The DNA of that individual didn't fit cleanly into either group. Someone was trying to become something new, and they were doing it deliberately, at the exact moment their old world was disappearing forever. But who were the farmers who replaced them? Where did they come from? The answer is not what you expect. When we think about ancient Switzerland, we think Alpine, European, local. But the Neolithic farmers who arrived and replaced the hunter-gatherers, they didn't come from Europe at all. Their DNA traces back to Anatolia, to the region we now call Turkey. It is a landmark 2020 study published in Nature Communications, led by Dr. Anja Furtwängler and Professor Johannes Krause of the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology, analyzed 96 ancient human genomes from Switzerland, 96 individuals across thousands of years of prehistory. And one of the clearest findings was this: the early Neolithic Swiss population looked genetically far closer to people from ancient Anatolia than to any group from neighboring France or Germany. And these weren't wanderers who stumbled into the Alps. They were settlers. They came with seeds, livestock, and a plan. and they built something that still exists today, the lakeside pile dwellings, the Fallbauten, UNESCO World Heritage Sites sitting on the edges of Swiss lakes. We've always pictured them as charming prehistoric homes, but look at them differently now. Built on platforms over water, so enemies couldn't approach unseen. Permanent, defended, deliberate. These were not temporary camps. These were the architectural statement of a people who had crossed a continent and refused to go back. The mitochondrial DNA from these sites, haplogroups N1A, T2, J, W, X, H, is a diverse blend that doesn't come from local European ancestry. It was imported. These were foreign bloodlines planting themselves in alpine soil. And here's where the timeline gets strange. Then Swiss farming villages appear on the plateau before equivalent settlements appear in adjacent France and Germany. The standard model says farming spread from east to west across Europe in a clean wave. But Switzerland's evidence suggests an unexpected alpine corridor, a path that nobody had fully mapped, that brought these people in earlier than anyone predicted. But inside the genomes of these early farmers, scientists found something that didn't fit, a signal that didn't belong to Anatolia. It didn't belong to European hunter-gatherers, didn't belong to anything in the ancient DNA database at the time, a ghost. And it was hiding inside the oldest layers of Swiss prehistory. Scientists have a specific word for this. When they find a genetic signal in ancient DNA that doesn't match any known population, living or dead, they call it a ghost population, not a metaphor, a technical term. It means something was here, something contributed DNA to the people we're studying, and we have absolutely no idea who they were. In Switzerland, this ghost signal appears in ancient samples from the Neolithic period. It persists through the Bronze Age, and it doesn't match Western hunter-gatherers, Anatolian farmers, or the steppe populations that later swept across Europe. It belongs to nobody on the map. A 2025 paper published in the journal G3, Genes, Genomes, Genetics, from Oxford Academic, formally studied how these unsampled ghost populations distort our understanding of ancient European genetics. The conclusion was direct. Our demographic models are systematically wrong because this missing component has never been accounted for. The Swiss ghost signal isn't a measurement error. It's a real gap in human knowledge. 3 hypotheses currently exist among researchers. The first, a relict pre-Neolithic European group that survived in alpine isolation long after its kind had disappeared everywhere else on the continent. Second, an unsampled population from the Caucasus-Pontic border zone, a region that sent multiple migration waves into Europe, but has never been fully represented in ancient DNA databases. Third, a migration so early, it predates every genome ever sequenced from this part of the world. None of these has been confirmed, and all of them are terrifying in their own way. And the Remodello culture, a Bronze Age people of northern Italy and southern Switzerland, active between roughly 3,400 and 2,400 BCE, appears to carry this ghost component at elevated levels. Their metalwork was unlike anything around them. Their burial customs mixed Eastern and Western traditions in ways that made no geographic sense. They were a people caught between worlds they couldn't name. Then and then, just as researchers were starting to trace this signal, something arrived that would change Swiss DNA forever. Something that was, at that same moment, erasing entire civilizations across the rest of Europe. The steppe riders were coming. Between 3000 and 2000 BCE, one of the most violent demographic transformations in all of human prehistory was happening. A massive population from the Pontic-Caspian steppe, the flat grasslands north of the Black Sea, was moving west. And they had horses, they had wheels, they had new languages and new gods, and they had a genetic signature so powerful that it replaced 40 to 75% of existing European DNA in some regions within just a few generations. Researchers call them the Yamnaya, and they remade Europe. In Britain, steppe ancestry went from 0 to dominant in under 500 years. In Germany, the same. In Poland and France, across the northern plains, the genetic transformation was total. But in Switzerland? Switzerland didn't fall the same way. The Furtwängler study found that steppe-related ancestry in Swiss ancient genomes was measurably lower than in neighboring regions, even though it arrived earlier in the timeline. The Alps had done something no army could do. They slowed the demographic replacement, and inside that same dataset, 4 female individuals from late Neolithic Swiss sites showed zero-step ancestry, even 1,000 years after this ancestry had already appeared in the region. Some women in alpine valleys were carrying the older bloodlines forward in time, quietly, invisibly, while the world outside was being rewritten. The mountains weren't geography. They were a genetic vault. Archaeological evidence shows that the corded ware culture, the material signature of early steppe arrivals, did reach Switzerland. The pots are there, the tools are there, but the genetic mixing ratios tell a different story from the rest of Europe. This wasn't conquest, this was negotiation. Slow, uneven, incomplete. Switzerland held, but holding comes with a cost. Because the next group that arrived didn't try to replace the Swiss with people, they tried to replace them with an idea, and it worked, sort of. This is the strangest chapter in Swiss prehistory, and it says something about human nature that goes far beyond genetics. Between 2800 and 1800 BCE, a cultural package spread across Europe. Archaeologists call it the bell beaker phenomenon. It included a very specific set of objects, a type of pottery shaped like an upside-down bell, copper daggers, archery wrist guards, and a particular drinking ritual. Wherever you found these objects, you found a shared cultural identity, and it spread from Portugal all the way to Poland. In most of Europe, when the bell beaker culture arrived, it came with people, high-step ancestry, new genes, new blood. But in Switzerland, something different happened. The Furtwängler study found that bell beaker culture spread enthusiastically through Switzerland. The pottery is there, the daggers are there, the burial orientation, the ritual posture, all of it, perfectly performed. But the DNA underneath those graves belongs to people who are genetically far closer to Neolithic Anatolian farmers than to the steppe warriors who created this cultural tradition. Think about what that means. The Swiss adopted the symbols, the rituals, the aesthetic, or the entire visual identity of a culture without becoming genetically part of it. They performed an identity that wasn't biologically theirs. One grave in the Valais region showed a man buried in full bell beaker ceremony, drinking vessel at his side, wrist guard on his arm. His mitochondrial DNA traced back not to the Russian steppe, but to a lineage present in central Anatolia thousands of years earlier. He dressed like a steppe warrior. He died like a steppe warrior. But his blood said something completely different. Archaeologists first called this imitation, but the scale of it and the precision of it suggests something more deliberate. These people knew exactly what image they needed to project, and why. The question of identity and performance is not a modern problem. It is ancient, and it is written into the Swiss genome. But what came next was no performance. What came next was the real thing, the most sophisticated, most feared, a most artistically brilliant culture in prehistoric Europe, and they didn't just pass through Switzerland, they made it the center of their world. Most people, when they think of the ancient Celts, picture Ireland, Scotland, the misty Atlantic coast. That is the myth. The archaeological and genetic truth is that Celtic civilization reached its absolute peak not on the Atlantic fringe, but here, in the Alps, in Switzerland, at a lake, Lake Neuchâtel, Switzerland, around 450 BCE. This is La Tène, the type site for the most mature, most complex phase of Celtic culture in all of Europe. The finest Celtic metalwork ever found came from this lake. Swords with flowing organic designs, torques of twisted gold, ceremonial shields deposited in the water, as offerings to gods no one fully remembers anymore. The most elaborate ritual deposits, the most advanced ironwork. All of it centered on a lake in a landlocked country that most people think of as politically neutral and historically quiet. The dominant Celtic tribe of the region were the Helvetii, and their story is not quiet at all. Originally from southern Germany, they migrated into the Swiss plateau under pressure from Germanic tribes pushing in from the north and east. Britannica records their presence in Switzerland as the major pre-Roman population of the region. Caesar described them as one of the most powerful Gallic peoples, and then, in 58 BCE, they tried to leave. 250,000 people, men, women, children, elderly, packed up everything they owned, and began a mass migration toward Western Gaul. They burned their own towns behind them, so no one could turn back. Julius Caesar stopped them at the Battle of Bibracte. He defeated them. He forced the survivors back to Switzerland. Read his account, and it sounds like a military operation, but read it through the lens of genetics, and it sounds like something else entirely. A displaced people, searching for a land that finally felt like home. Shame because the Helvetii themselves were already a mixed population. Their genomes, had we been able to sequence them, would have shown layers from at least 4 distinct prehistoric sources: hunter-gatherers, Anatolian farmers, steppe ancestry, and the ghost signal that had been threading through this region since the Neolithic. Caesar sent them home. But he couldn't erase what they had built here. And after his victory, something appeared in the Swiss genetic record that had no clear ancestral origin in the region. A new population, from the south. And they brought something in their DNA that connected Switzerland to a world most historians never mention in the same sentence. When historians talk about Roman Switzerland, they talk about roads, amphitheaters, heated baths, administrative efficiency. They don't talk about the people Rome left behind. From 58 BCE to roughly 400 CE, almost 5 centuries, Switzerland was under Roman control. And during that time, the empire did what empires always do. It moved people. Legionary soldiers from North Africa, the Levant, and the Eastern Mediterranean were garrisoned in Switzerland. Administrative settlers arrived from across the Roman world. Enslaved people, bought, transported, and put to work, came from Egypt, from Syria, from Carthage. All of them lived here. Many of them died here. And some of them had children here. The forensic Y chromosome study published in 2020 by Dr. Martin Zieger and Dr. Sylvia Utz, analyzing 606 Swiss individuals, found haplogroup J2 immeasurable in Swiss populations, particularly south of the Alpine Divide in the Italian-speaking canton of Ticino. J2A is a lineage associated with the ancient Near East and the Eastern Mediterranean. It didn't come from Germanic tribes. It didn't come from Celtic farmers. It came from the Roman world, saying these are Rome's children, still here. Augusta Raurica, founded in 44 BCE near modern Basel, is one of the best preserved Roman towns north of the Alps. Excavations still ongoing in 2024 and 2025 have uncovered infant burials, cosmopolitan material culture, and a population diversity that rewrites what we thought a Roman Swiss city looked like. And in one grave, a woman buried with Roman ceramic goods and a local Celtic offering placed beside her. Her mitochondrial DNA traced to North Africa. She lived at the intersection of 3 civilizations simultaneously. She didn't choose that. History chose it for her, and history then forgot to write it down. The Roman period didn't erase Swiss genetic distinctiveness. It layered onto it, adding a Mediterranean depth that went underground when Rome fell. Because when the legions finally withdrew in the 5th century, they left behind children, thousands of them. And those children's descendants are walking the streets of Geneva, Zurich, and Basel right now, carrying an empire in their cells without a single history book telling them so. But the empire that came after Rome, it didn't try to add to the layers, it tried to erase them. After Rome collapsed, Europe didn't find peace. It found the migration period. Wave after wave of Germanic peoples, pushed by conflicts further east, flooded through the mountain passes. For Switzerland, and this meant 2 dominant groups, the Alemanni from the north, the Burgundians from the west. They replaced the language. Latin, which had become the tongue of Roman Switzerland, gave way to Old High German in the north and east, and to early French in the west. They replaced the religion. Roman polytheism and early Christianity were gradually overwritten with Germanic traditions before Christianity fully took hold. They replaced the political structure, and the careful Roman administrative system was dismantled. But the genome held. The 2020 Zieger and Utz forensic study, the most comprehensive Y chromosome dataset ever assembled for Switzerland, found something remarkable. The Germanic genetic signal is present, yes. Haplogroups associated with Germanic migration, I1R1BU106, appear in higher frequencies north of the Alpine Divide. But it is not uniform, and it is not dominant everywhere. South of the Alps, in Ticino, the picture is completely different. R1B U152, a lineage linked to pre-Roman Iron Age populations of Central Europe, including the Celts, reaches 53% in the Ticino sample. The Roman-era admixture is still measurable. The older layers survived, and this is the line that stops you. The Alpine Divide, the same mountain range that slowed the steppe migration in 2800 BCE, is still visible in Swiss Y chromosomes today. A geographical barrier from the Bronze Age is still shaping the genetic gradient of a 21st century country. Mountains write into genomes, and they write for a very long time. Switzerland today speaks 4 national languages. It has 26 cantons with fierce independence. It resists centralized national identity more than almost any other country in Europe. And the DNA says this isn't politics, it's ancient. It's written into the divided genetic history of the people themselves. A country of different layers living side by side, held together by borders that never fully erased what came before. 7 population waves, 7 rewrites. And still, something in the Swiss genome belongs to none of them. That signal from segment 4, the ghost. It's still there, and in 2024, a research team announced they may have found where it came from. While the answer was so far from Switzerland that the scientists' first reaction was to call it an error. They weren't wrong to be shocked. Let's go back to the ghost. We first mentioned it when we were talking about the Neolithic farmers, a genetic component inside ancient Swiss DNA that didn't match any known population. Not hunter-gatherers, not Anatolian farmers, not steppe people, not anything in the database. Now, with everything we've layered in, let's see what we actually know about it. This signal persists through the Neolithic. It persists through the Bronze Age. It appears in samples from the Celtic and potentially even Roman periods at low but measurable levels in specific Swiss population clusters. It survived the steppe migration. It survived the Bell-Beaker transformation. It survived Caesar, Rome, and the Germanic flood. Whatever this population was, they were not easily erased. In 2025, a paper published in G3, Genes, Genomes, Genetics by Oxford academic formally proved that demographic models of ancient Europe have been systematically wrong because of exactly this kind of unaccounted ghost ancestry. The models were built on incomplete data, and the Swiss signal is proof of what's missing. The leading scientific hypothesis today places the likely source population somewhere at the Caucasus-Pontic interface, the zone between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea that has been incompletely sampled in ancient DNA research. Some multiple migration waves came from this region across thousands of years, but we have never fully sequenced its ancient populations. One 2024 research direction pointed even further east, a source population at a geographic distance from Switzerland so extreme that the first peer reviewer of that paper called the results statistically implausible. The team stood by their data. B.N. John Hawks, paleoanthropologist at the University of Wisconsin and one of the most respected voices in ancient human genetics, wrote in his 2025 analysis, "Genetic models are finding more and more unknown lineages. Ghost populations are real gaps in our sampling, not statistical noise." Here is what that means in plain language. There is a group of people, an entire population, who lived somewhere in the ancient world, contributed their DNA to the earliest layers of Swiss prehistory, and then vanished so completely that no ancient grave, no archaeological site, no sequenced skeleton anywhere in the world has been matched to them. The only proof they ever existed is a number, a frequency, a whisper in a data set. And somewhere in Switzerland, in a valley, in a city, on a tram in Zurich, there are people walking around today who carry that whisper inside their cells, and they have absolutely no idea. Let's take one step back and look at everything we've covered. 30,000 years ago, Western hunter-gatherers in the Alpine region, survivors of the Ice Age, connected to the land in ways we can barely imagine. 5,500 BCE, Anatolian farmers arrived through an unexpected mountain corridor. The hunter-gatherers collapsed from the record within centuries. Something violent happened, but we can't fully name it. Somewhere in between, a ghost population leaves its fingerprints in the genome and then disappears from history entirely. Say 3000 BCE. The steppe riders arrive. They reshape Europe. But the Alps slow them down, and 4 women in a Swiss valley are still carrying pre-step blood 1,000 years after the rest of the continent has been transformed. 2800 BCE, the Bell Beaker culture spreads. Switzerland buys the identity without inheriting the people. 450 BCE, the Celts build their greatest civilization at a lake in Switzerland. Or their dominant haplogroup, R1b-U152, is still the most frequent in the Swiss genome today, at 26% average and 53% in Ticino. 58 BCE, Rome arrives. North African, Levantine, and Eastern Mediterranean DNA enters the Swiss gene pool. Rome falls, those bloodlines stay. 400 to 600 CE, Germanic tribes flood in. They replace the language and the politics. But south of the Alps, the older layers survive. The mountain holds the line. Again, 7 waves, 7 transformations. Use one mountain range. And still, underneath all of it, a ghost no one can name. A 2020 forensic study of 606 modern Swiss individuals found that the Alpine Divide is still visible in their Y chromosomes today. The same geographical line that shaped migration in the Bronze Age is still shaping genetics in the 21st century. History doesn't just leave traces in museums, it leaves traces in people. Switzerland is not a mystery because it is unusual, whereas Switzerland is a mystery because it is a compression of everything, every migration, every replacement, every survival, layered into a space small enough that the contradictions become visible. Every person who ever crossed those mountains brought their world with them. The Anatolian farmer who burned his old life and built a new home on the water. The hunter who was buried with a farmer's grain. And the woman in Augusta Raurica who was born between 3 civilizations and buried between 2 of them. The Helvetii who burned their own towns and marched into an uncertain future. The people who carried an empire in their blood and never knew its name. They are all still here, not in museums, not in textbooks, in people. And the ghost, the oldest signal, the unnamed population, the one who survived everything, is still unresolved. The source may never be found. The population may have left no other trace anywhere on Earth. Their only monument is a frequency, a quiet pattern in data that says, we were here long before any of this, and something of us remained. If a people can vanish so completely that only a whisper of their genome survives, carried unknowingly by strangers in a country that didn't exist when they were alive, did they truly disappear? Or are they, in the only way that matters, still here? This is Switzerland, and its DNA has never told the whole truth. Not yet. Because this same ghost signal, this unclassified component, has now been detected in 3 other European populations that share no obvious history with the Swiss. The trail doesn't end in the Alps. It goes deeper. It goes east. And that story is next. Drop a comment right now. Which part of this surprised you the most? The ghost DNA with no name? The Bell Beaker identity performance? Down the fact that Rome's children are still walking Swiss streets? Or something else? I read every single comment. And if this changed how you think about identity and where we really come from, share it with one person who thinks they already know their ancestry, because after watching this, they might want to look again.